The red wine dripped down my face, staining my faded cotton dress as my daughter-in-law stood over me, her Louboutin heels clicking on my worn linoleum floor. "You're nothing but poor trash," Victoria screamed, her diamond bracelet catching the light from my cheap ceiling fixture. "You embarrass us every single day with your thrift store rags and your pathetic little house." What she didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that sitting in investment accounts across 3 different banks, I had $40 million. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how I lived like a pauper for 20 years while secretly being one of the wealthiest women in my county. And that night, with Merlot burning my eyes and Victoria's cruel laughter echoing through my kitchen, I decided it was finally time to show her exactly who she'd been calling trash. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. And if you've ever been underestimated, judged by your appearance, or treated like you were nothing, you'll understand why I waited so long to show them the truth. To everyone who knew me, I was just Eleanor, the widow getting by on pennies. I lived in a 1,200 square foot ranch house that I bought in 1987 for $89,000. My furniture was a mix of hand-me-downs and garage sale finds. My wardrobe came from Goodwill and Walmart clearance racks. Nothing I owned cost more than $25. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it and duct tape holding the passenger seat together. I clipped coupons religiously and shopped at discount grocery stores. My garden was full of vegetables that I grew to save money. The neighbors assumed I was on a fixed income, barely scraping by. The church brought me casseroles occasionally, and I accepted them graciously. To the outside world, I was struggling. But that was exactly what I wanted them to see. The truth was something entirely different. In 1998, my husband Richard Hartwell sold his software company for $52 million. Richard was a software engineer who had turned entrepreneur, developing encryption software for financial institutions. After taxes, we had $34 million. We invested conservatively through a private wealth management firm in Chicago. Richard and I never needed luxury to be happy. We kept living in our modest home, driving our practical cars, enjoying simple pleasures. Then in 2003, Richard died suddenly of a massive heart attack. He was only 61 years old. I inherited everything. By the time the estate was settled, I had $40 million in various accounts and investments. The portfolio grew steadily over the years. Today, it sits at $40,200,000. It generates approximately $1.6 million annually in passive income. I live on $35,000 a year and reinvest everything else. Only 4 people in the world knew this truth. My wealth manager Patricia Chen, my attorney James Morrison, my accountant, and Richard's college roommate Robert. I made a conscious choice to hide my wealth, and I had my reasons. Richard's death taught me something profound. Money can't buy you more time with the people you love. After he died, I watched his brother's family tear themselves apart over a much smaller inheritance. Cousins sued each other. Siblings stopped speaking. It was ugly and heartbreaking. I decided right then that I would live simply and watch who loved me for me, not for what I could give them. I wanted to raise my son Michael with a strong work ethic, without the entitlement that often comes with wealth. My theory was simple. You can't spoil what hasn't been exposed to luxury. I planned to reveal the truth when Michael proved himself worthy through his actions, his gratitude, his character, his genuine kindness toward others. I actually enjoyed the simplicity of my modest life. There was no pressure, no fake friends, no gold diggers circling. I was free to be exactly who I was, not who money might make me. When people brought me casseroles because they thought I needed help, it touched me deeply. They were giving from their hearts, expecting nothing in return. That's real kindness. That's what I wanted to see in the people around me. Could they love Eleanor the poor widow, or would they only love Eleanor the millionaire? I was running the longest character test in history, and I was about to get my results in the most dramatic way possible. Michael was 16 years old when his father died in 2003. I told him we had enough to be comfortable, nothing more. I gave him $100,000 for college and told him that was most of the inheritance. He believed me completely. Michael worked part-time all through college. He had a job at the campus bookstore, then later as a tutor for accounting students. He graduated with minimal debt, maybe $20,000 in student loans. What Michael didn't know was that I paid off those loans anonymously through a third-party service. He thought a scholarship foundation had forgiven his debt as part of some program for students with deceased parents. He never questioned it. He just felt grateful and moved forward with his life. Michael became a certified public accountant and got a solid job at a mid-sized firm making $78,000 a year. He was stable, responsible, and hardworking. Everything I had hoped he would become. For years, our relationship was exactly what I had dreamed of. Michael called me every week without fail. He visited twice a month, sometimes more. He helped me with house repairs even though I could have hired someone. We had game nights where we'd play Scrabble and drink tea. We maintained our holiday traditions, baking cookies together every Christmas, watching fireworks every 4th of July. Michael was genuinely grateful for everything he believed I had sacrificed for him. He'd often say things like, "Mom, I know you gave me your life insurance money for college. I'll never forget that." The truth was I had given him a tiny fraction of what I could have, but he valued it as if it were everything. That gratitude, that humility, that appreciation for what he had, that was exactly what I wanted to instill in him. I was so proud of the man he had become. He was grounded and decent and kind. He treated service workers with respect. He volunteered at a tax preparation clinic for low-income families. He donated to charity even though his own budget was tight. Michael had turned out exactly right, with strong values and a good heart. I had a plan forming in my mind. When I turned 70, I would sit him down and reveal everything. I would set him up beautifully, help him buy a house, establish a trust fund for my future grandchildren, and we would enjoy our remaining years together without financial stress. It was going to be perfect. I was maybe 2 years away from that revelation when everything changed. When Michael met Victoria. It was 18 months ago when Michael first brought her home to meet me. Her full name was Victoria Eleanor Ashford. She was 29 years old, and she introduced herself as a luxury brand consultant. I later learned that was a very generous interpretation of her actual job, which was an entry-level marketing coordinator position paying $47,000 a year. But that first day, Victoria presented herself as successful, sophisticated, and polished. She arrived wearing head-to-toe designer clothing. A Chanel purse, Louboutin heels, what looked like a Burberry trench coat. Everything about her screamed expensive. Michael seemed nervous around her, eager to impress her, constantly checking to see if she approved of things. Victoria's first words when she walked into my house were, "Oh, this is where you live? How rustic." She said rustic the way someone might say condemned. She toured my modest home like she was walking through a museum of poverty, running her finger along the furniture, inspecting for dust, wrinkling her nose at my simple decor. I had spent 3 days preparing for their visit. I made Michael's childhood favorite, homemade lasagna from scratch, garlic bread, a fresh salad, and apple pie for dessert. I set the table with my nicest dishes and even bought fresh flowers, which was a $12 splurge in my carefully maintained poor persona. When I served dinner, Victoria looked at the lasagna and said, "I'm actually gluten-free, dairy-free, and I don't eat red meat." "Didn't Michael tell you?" Michael looked genuinely confused. This was apparently the first time he was hearing about these dietary restrictions. Victoria didn't eat a single bite of the meal I had spent hours preparing. Instead, she sat at my table scrolling through her phone, occasionally sighing dramatically. She asked me exactly 0 questions about myself, my life, my interests, or my history. After 47 minutes, she announced they had to get back to the city. Michael looked embarrassed and apologetic as they left. After they drove away, I sat at my kitchen table looking at the untouched lasagna and felt something cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't anger exactly. It was recognition. I had seen something in Victoria's eyes during that brief visit. Something calculating and cold. The way she had surveyed my home, it wasn't with disgust at the modest surroundings. It was with assessment. She was measuring Michael's worth by his mother's apparent poverty, and she was finding us both wanting. But there was also something else there. A sense of superiority, of triumph almost, as if she had married down deliberately and was proud of her charity in doing so. Over the next 8 months of their courtship, Victoria's comments escalated steadily. Every visit brought new observations about my lifestyle. "Eleanor, have you considered updating your style? I know a personal shopper who does charity cases. That car is a safety hazard. Is it even street legal? The bumper is literally held on with wire. This furniture looks like it came from the curb on trash day." She brought me gifts, expensive items I never asked for. A face cream that cost $340. A cashmere scarf worth $890. She always mentioned the price. "This face cream is $340, but I got my employee discount." "You're welcome. This scarf is $890. I thought you could use something nice for once." The subtext was always the same. "You're poor. You're pathetic. I'm so generous for even acknowledging you." She implied constantly that I was a burden on Michael. "Michael worries about you constantly, you know. Your finances, your health, this house falling apart around you." I bit my tongue every single time. I said nothing. I observed everything. I watched how Michael changed around her. He became defensive about me, apologetic for my existence. When I tried to decline one of Victoria's expensive gifts, Michael actually said, "Mom, just accept it. She's trying to be nice." He couldn't see what I saw. He couldn't see the contempt behind her generosity. I learned bits and pieces about Victoria's background through these visits. Her father was a surgeon. Her mother was a socialite who sat on charity boards. Victoria had grown up in a gated community, attended private schools, and had never wanted for anything. She expected a certain standard of living, and my son's modest accountant salary combined with his apparently impoverished mother did not meet that standard. Yet she stayed with him. That intrigued me. Why would someone so obsessed with wealth and status stay with my middle-class son? I filed that question away for later investigation. 10 months into their relationship, Michael proposed. When he told me, my heart sank, but I smiled and congratulated them. The engagement ring was 2.8 carats and cost $43,000. Michael mentioned the price with a kind of stressed pride, and I knew immediately that he had taken out a personal loan to afford it. Victoria posted 47 Instagram photos of the ring in the first weekend alone. The engagement party was held at Victoria's parents' estate, a sprawling property with a circular driveway and columns at the entrance. I wore my best dress, a navy blue piece from Dress Barn that had cost me $34.99. Victoria's mother Constance greeted me at the door. She looked at my dress and said, "Oh, Eleanor. How quaint. Is that from a vintage shop?" Before I could answer, Victoria appeared and said, loud enough for the other guests to hear, "Michael's mother lives very frugally. Very fixed income. Almost poverty level, really. We'll need to help her eventually, I suppose." She said it with a smile, but her eyes were cold. Several guests glanced at me with pity. I smiled graciously and said nothing. But I memorized that moment. I filed it away with all the others. Later in the evening, I was in the hallway near the powder room when I overheard Victoria talking to one of her friends. The friend said, "Victoria, honestly, you're marrying so far down. But I guess he's stable." Victoria's response made my blood run cold. "He's moldable. And boring guys worship you, which makes them easy to manage. It's actually perfect." The friend laughed. They clinked their champagne glasses. I stood frozen in that hallway, understanding in that moment exactly what my son had gotten himself into. Victoria wasn't marrying Michael in spite of his modest circumstances. She was marrying him because of them. She wanted someone she could control, someone who would be grateful for her attention, someone who would never challenge her or question her authority in the relationship. I should have said something then. I should have pulled Michael aside and warned him. But I didn't. I told myself I needed more information. I told myself Michael was an adult who had to make his own choices. But the truth, if I'm being honest, was that I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to see if my son would defend me, choose me, remember the values I had raised him with. I wanted to see if Victoria would reveal herself so completely that even Michael couldn't deny what she was. So I stayed quiet and I watched. The wedding planning was its own special nightmare. Victoria wanted a $120,000 wedding. Michael was panicking about the cost, working overtime constantly, looking exhausted and stressed. Victoria's response to his stress was to complain that if I wasn't so useless financially, I could help like normal mothers do. I offered $5,000, telling them it was all I could spare from my savings. Victoria actually laughed in my face. $5,000? My shoes cost more than that. Victoria's parents ended up paying for the entire wedding, and they held it over Michael constantly. Every decision, every detail was controlled by Victoria and her family. I wasn't consulted about anything. I offered to make the wedding favors. I'm actually quite skilled at crafts and could have created something beautiful and personal. Victoria's response was swift and cruel. Your homemade garbage? At my wedding? Absolutely not. On the wedding day itself, I was seated in the 7th row, behind Victoria's parents' friends, behind people who didn't even know my son. During the reception, there was no mother of the groom's speech. My table was in the back corner of the venue. Victoria's mother gave a speech that included the line, "We're gaining a son, and hopefully we can help improve his circumstances." The implication was clear. Michael came from poverty, from nothing, and they were rescuing him. I left the reception early. I sat in my old Honda in the parking lot and cried harder than I had cried since Richard's funeral. I wasn't crying because of the disrespect, although that hurt. I was crying because I was watching my son slip away from me. I was watching him become someone I didn't recognize, someone who would allow his wife to treat his mother like garbage, someone who valued appearance and status over character and integrity. The son I had raised would never have tolerated this treatment. But that son was disappearing, replaced by someone desperate to please a woman who would never be satisfied. The first year of their marriage was a slow-motion nightmare. Visits to my house became rare and strained. When Michael and Victoria did come over, Victoria controlled everything. She refused to eat my food, claiming she couldn't risk food poisoning from my kitchen. She spent entire visits on her phone, sighing loudly, making it clear she wanted to leave. Her comments became increasingly cruel. How do you live like this? It's so depressing. Don't you have any pride in yourself? The smell in here, it's like poverty has a smell. Every visit ended the same way, with Victoria announcing they needed to leave because being in my house gave her anxiety. Michael stopped defending me entirely. He just sat there silently while his wife insulted his mother and the home he grew up in. One summer afternoon, I overheard them talking in my backyard. I was in the kitchen with the window open, and they didn't realize I could hear them. Victoria said, "Your mother is an embarrassment. Thank God my friends don't know about this place." Michael gave a nervous laugh and said, "She's just old-fashioned." Victoria pressed him. "Promise me we'll never end up like this. Promise me." There was a long pause before Michael said, "I promise." Those two words broke something fundamental inside me. My son was ashamed of me. My son, who I had raised with love and sacrifice, who I had put through college, who I had supported through every challenge, was ashamed of his mother because she appeared to be poor. The phone calls decreased from weekly to every 2 weeks, then to monthly. Holidays became, "We're doing Victoria's family this year." My birthday came and went with just a card in the mail. No visit. No phone call. Just a generic card with a printed message and Michael's signature. It was the first time in 36 years that Michael hadn't spent my birthday with me. I sat alone in my house that evening, looking at the card, wondering how we had gotten here. Wondering if I had made a terrible mistake by hiding my wealth. Wondering if I should just reveal the truth and end this charade. But something stopped me. Some stubborn part of me needed to see this through. Needed to know if Michael would choose me without the incentive of money. Needed to know if he would remember who I was and what I had done for him. So I waited. And I watched. And I prepared myself for what I somehow knew was coming. Everything came to a head when Michael and Victoria started seriously house hunting. They had been looking for months, and Victoria had very specific requirements. She wanted a dream home in the suburbs, something that would impress her friends and reflect what she considered an appropriate lifestyle. The house they finally settled on was priced at $750,000. It was 4,500 square feet with 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a 3-car garage. It was beautiful, excessive, and completely beyond what Michael could reasonably afford on his salary. The down payment alone was $150,000. Michael was working 75-hour weeks, trying to save money. I could see the toll it was taking on him during his increasingly rare visits. He had lost weight. His hair was thinning. He had dark circles under his eyes. He looked perpetually exhausted and stressed. But Victoria refused to compromise on the house. Every time Michael suggested looking at something smaller, something more affordable, Victoria would shut him down immediately. "I won't live in something small," she would say. "I have a certain standard, Michael. If you loved me, you'd want to give me that." It was emotional blackmail dressed up as romantic expectation, and my son was too deep in the relationship to see it clearly. 3 months into their house search, they asked to meet me for coffee. It was a Tuesday afternoon at a chain coffee shop near Michael's office. I arrived first and ordered a simple black coffee for $1.50. When they arrived, Victoria ordered some elaborate drink with multiple modifications that cost $8.75. We sat at a small table by the window, and there was tension in the air immediately. Michael looked nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup. Victoria looked determined, her jaw set in that way I had come to recognize as her preparing for battle. Victoria didn't waste time with pleasantries. "So, Eleanor, we need to discuss your contribution," she said, stirring her elaborate coffee drink with a wooden stick. I looked at her carefully. "My contribution?" I asked. Michael jumped in, his voice apologetic. "Mom, we're buying a house. We could really use help with the down payment." I had known this was coming. I had prepared myself for this moment. "I don't have that kind of money," I said simply. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Everyone has savings, Eleanor. Retirement accounts. Home equity. You could take out a home equity loan on this house." She gestured vaguely, as if my house was both worthless and potentially valuable at the same time. "I'm comfortable as I am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I can't help with $150,000. Victoria's mask slipped completely. Her face flushed red and her voice rose. "Can't or won't?" she demanded. "Can't," I replied firmly. She slammed her hand on the table, making both coffee cups jump. "This is unbelievable. Michael is your son. Your only child. Normal mothers want to help their children. Normal mothers make sacrifices." The irony of her lecturing me about sacrifice was almost funny, but I didn't laugh. "You're sitting in your little poverty house hoarding whatever pennies you have," she continued, her voice getting louder. Other customers in the coffee shop were starting to stare. "You're selfish. You're a selfish old woman who cares more about your own comfort than your son's future." Michael finally spoke up. "Victoria, that's enough." But his protest was weak, half-hearted. Victoria turned on him. "No, Michael. She needs to hear this. She needs to face the truth about herself." I stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table for my $1.50 coffee, and walked out. I didn't say another word. As I pushed through the door, I heard Victoria's voice behind me. "See? She can't even face the truth about herself. She just runs away." I got in my car and sat there for a moment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not from fear or sadness, but from the sheer force of will it was taking not to march back in there and tell them everything. Not to explain that I could write them a check for $150,000 without even noticing it was gone. But I didn't. I started my car and drove home in silence. What I didn't know was that this coffee shop confrontation was just the beginning of Victoria's campaign against me. Over the next several weeks, she told everyone in their social circle that I had refused to help them with the house. She painted a narrative where I was a selfish mother hoarding modest savings while my son struggled. She told Michael's coworkers at a company party, "His mother won't help us, can you believe it? Your own child asking for help and you just say no." She made thinly veiled posts on social media. One post read, "When family refuses to support you even though they could, it really shows their character." Another said, "Learning that blood doesn't mean loyalty." The whispers reached my extended family. My sister Paula called me one afternoon. "Eleanor, is it true you won't help Michael with a house?" she asked, her voice concerned. Paula also didn't know about my wealth. As far as she knew, I was living on Richard's modest life insurance payout and Social Security. "I don't have $150,000 to give," I told her. There was a long pause. "Could you take out a home equity loan? He's your son, Eleanor. He's your only child." The implication was clear. I should go into debt for Michael. I should mortgage my security for his dream house. "I can't do that, Paula," I said quietly. We ended the call shortly after, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. Michael stopped calling entirely after that coffee shop meeting. 6 weeks passed without a word from him. 6 weeks of complete silence. I tried reaching out. I sent text messages asking how he was doing. I called and left voicemails. Everything went unanswered. My text showed as read but got no response. My calls went straight to voicemail. It was as if I had ceased to exist in my son's life. The loneliness during those weeks was profound and aching. I would sit in my quiet house, the house where I had raised Michael, where we had celebrated every birthday and holiday, where we had laughed and cried and built a life together, and I felt like a ghost haunting the memory of my own family. But I also felt something else during those weeks. Clarity. Cold, hard clarity about what was happening and what needed to happen next. Victoria had shown me exactly who she was. She was cruel, materialistic, manipulative, and vindictive. She saw people as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. She had successfully isolated my son from me, turned him against the woman who had given him everything, all because I wouldn't fund her fantasy lifestyle. And Michael, my son, had let it happen. He had chosen her demands over my dignity. He had chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. He had chosen the path of least resistance, which happened to be the path that led away from me. After 6 weeks of silence, I decided to make one final attempt to reach my son. One last olive branch before I did what I was increasingly certain I needed to do. I called Michael directly, and for the first time in weeks, he answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded tired, wary. "Michael, it's Mom," I said, keeping my voice warm despite the hurt. "I was hoping you and Victoria could come to dinner this Saturday. I miss you." There was a long pause. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, Victoria's voice asking who it was. "Okay, Mom," Michael finally said. "Saturday at 6. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "I'll make your favorites." We hung up, and I immediately began planning. I spent 3 days preparing for that dinner. I made pot roast, Michael's favorite since childhood. I made homemade rolls from scratch, the recipe Richard's mother had taught me 40 years ago. I made green bean casserole and roasted potatoes. I baked an apple pie with a lattice crust that took me 2 hours to perfect. I cleaned my house until it shined. I ironed my best tablecloth, the one I had received as a wedding gift and only used for special occasions. I bought fresh flowers from the grocery store, a $15 splurge that felt significant in my maintained persona of poverty. I set the table carefully, placing everything just so. I wanted this dinner to be perfect. I wanted to remind Michael of who we used to be together, of the bond we had shared before Victoria entered our lives. Saturday arrived. 6 o'clock came and went. I stood in my kitchen, checking the pot roast in the oven, watching it slowly dry out as the minutes ticked by. At 6:45, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Running late. No apology, no explanation, just those 2 words. I turned the oven down to keep the food warm and waited. At 7:30, I finally heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window and watched them get out. Victoria was wearing a designer dress and heels completely inappropriate for a casual dinner at her mother-in-law's house. Michael looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped as he walked to my door. I opened the door before they could knock, smiling despite my nerves. Come in, come in. I'm so glad you're here. Victoria's entrance was like a cold wind. Oh God, we're eating here? I thought you meant you'd take us out to dinner. Her voice was loud, deliberately loud, as if she wanted to make sure I understood her disappointment. I made your favorites, Michael, I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. Pot roast, homemade rolls, apple pie. Victoria surveyed the table and wrinkled her nose. This looks heavy. I'm on a cleanse. Michael at least had the grace to say, it looks great, Mom. They sat down at the table, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I tried to make conversation as I served the food. How's the house search going? I asked, placing a plate in front of Michael. It was the wrong question. Victoria's face hardened immediately. Well, we would have bought one by now if we'd had support from family, she said, her voice sharp and accusing. I explained that I couldn't help with that amount, I said carefully, sitting down with my own plate. You explained nothing, Victoria shot back. You made excuses. Michael was focused on his food, not looking at either of us. Victoria, let's just eat, he said quietly. But Victoria was done pretending. She stood up from the table, her chair scraping loudly against my floor. No. I'm tired of pretending this is okay. She started pacing in my small kitchen, her heels clicking with each step. Do you know what Michael's coworkers think? She demanded, pointing at me. They think his mother doesn't care about him. They think you're selfish. That's not true, I said, my voice remaining calm even as my heart raced. Then prove it, Victoria shouted. Take out a loan. Sell this dump. Do something to show you actually care about your son's future. This is my home, I said quietly. This is a shack, Victoria spat. This is where poor people live. This is where people with no ambition, no standards, no self-respect live. I felt something inside me grow very still and very cold. Victoria, please lower your voice, I said. But Victoria was beyond reason now. She grabbed her wine glass, which was full of red Merlot that I had opened especially for this dinner. A bottle that had cost me $12, which was expensive for my budget, but I had wanted to make the evening nice. She held the glass up, her hand shaking with rage. I'll lower my voice when you stop being selfish, she screamed. Victoria, stop, Michael said, standing up now, but his protest was too little and far too late. Victoria threw the entire glass of wine directly in my face. The cold liquid hit me like a slap, splashing across my face, soaking into my hair, running down my neck and chest. It soaked my dress, the same faded cotton dress that Victoria had mocked 100 times before. The wine dripped onto the floor, onto my clean tablecloth, onto the dinner I had spent 3 days preparing. I sat there frozen, shocked, unable to process what had just happened. Wine burned in my eyes. I could taste it in my mouth. I could feel it dripping from my chin. That's what I think of you and your excuses. Victoria screamed, slamming the empty wine glass down on the table so hard I thought it might shatter. You're trash. You hear me? Poor, pathetic, worthless trash. Her voice reached a pitch that was almost inhuman. You sit in this disgusting house hoarding your pathetic little pension. You dress like you pulled clothes from a dumpster. You drive a car that should be in a junkyard. Every word was punctuated with a gesture, her hands waving wildly, her face contorted with rage and contempt. You're an embarrassment. Michael is ashamed of you. He just won't say it out loud. But he is. He's ashamed to have a mother like you. I slowly wiped the wine from my eyes with my napkin. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I looked at Michael, who was standing frozen by his chair, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. I looked at Victoria, who was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with an emotion that went beyond anger into something darker and more personal. Then I looked down at my wine-stained dress, at the ruined dinner on the table, at the destroyed evening I had tried so hard to create. And something inside me that had been bending for months, maybe years, finally snapped clean. Get out, I said. My voice was quiet but it cut through the room like a blade. Victoria grabbed her purse from the chair. Gladly. Enjoy dying alone in this dump, you miserable old hag. She stormed toward the door, her heels clicking furiously. She yanked the door open so hard that the frame cracked. I heard it splinter but I didn't look. I kept my eyes on Michael. He was still standing there, still frozen, still silent. Mom, he finally said, his voice small and uncertain. She's just upset about the house situation. She didn't mean. Get out, Michael, I said, and this time my voice was like ice. Mom, please, he took a step toward me. Get out of my house, I repeated, standing up now, wine dripping from my clothes, pooling at my feet. Both of you. Now. Michael's face crumpled. He looked like he wanted to say something, wanted to apologize, wanted to undo what had just happened. But he didn't. He just looked at me one more time, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite read, guilt or regret or maybe just the dawning realization that something fundamental had just broken between us. Then he turned and walked out, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click that was somehow worse than Victoria's violent slam. I stood alone in my kitchen, covered in wine, surrounded by the ruins of the dinner I had made with love. I could hear their car starting, hear the engine fade as they drove away. And then there was just silence. Complete, absolute silence. I looked around at my modest kitchen, at the simple furniture and worn linoleum and cheap fixtures that Victoria had mocked so mercilessly. I looked at the wine stains spreading across my tablecloth, at the cold food on the plates, at the apple pie sitting untouched on the counter. And I felt something that I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Not sadness or anger or despair. Relief. Because the test was over. The long experiment had reached its conclusion. I had my answer. I walked to my bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Wine matted in my gray hair. Wine staining my face and neck. Wine soaked through my dress. I looked like I had been assaulted, which in a way I had been. But as I stared at my reflection, I didn't see a victim. I saw someone who had been testing her family for 20 years and had finally gotten her results. They had failed. Catastrophically, completely, utterly failed. And now it was time to stop being the poor widow and become who I actually was. It was time to show them the truth. It was time to reveal the $40 million they knew nothing about. It was time for Victoria to learn exactly who she had been calling trash. I took a shower, washing the wine from my hair and skin. I changed into clean pajamas. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the locked box I kept in the back of my closet. Inside were all my important documents. Bank statements. Investment portfolios. Trust documents. Asset summaries. Everything I would need for what came next. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen, the same kitchen table where I had just been humiliated, and I began to make a list. A list of phone calls to make. A list of people to contact. A list of actions to take. Monday morning, everything would change. But tonight, I sat in my quiet house, and I smiled. Because sometimes the worst moment of your life is also the moment when you finally become free. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, making lists and plans with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The wine-stained tablecloth was still on the table, a physical reminder of what had happened, of the line that had been crossed. But I wasn't dwelling on the humiliation. I was focused on what came next. At 3 in the morning, I made my first call. My financial advisor Patricia Chin had given me an emergency number years ago, telling me to use it only if something serious happened. I decided this qualified. The phone rang 4 times before Patricia's sleepy voice answered. Hello? This is Patricia Chen. Patricia, it's Eleanor Hartwell, I said, my voice steady and calm. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need you to prepare everything. Full portfolio statements, asset summaries, account access codes, property deeds, investment breakdowns. Everything. There was a pause as Patricia processed what I was saying. I could hear her shifting, probably sitting up in bed. Eleanor? What's happened? After all these years of keeping everything quiet, why now? I looked down at the wine stain on my dress that I still hadn't changed out of. They threw wine in my face tonight, I said simply. My daughter-in-law threw wine in my face and called me trash. My son stood there and let it happen. It's time, Patricia. It's time to show them who they've been treating like garbage. Patricia's voice shifted from sleepy to alert and professional. I'll have everything ready by Monday at noon. Complete documentation, organized by account type, with valuations as of close of business Friday. Do you need anything else? Not yet, I said. But I'll be calling you Monday with additional instructions. This is going to be very public, Patricia. I want you prepared for that. Understood, she said. And Eleanor? I'm sorry this happened. But I think you're doing the right thing. We ended the call, and I sat in the dark for another hour, letting my plans solidify in my mind. Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp, I made my second call. Thomas Reed was a private investigator I had used once before, years ago, when I needed to verify some information about a contractor who wanted to do work on my house. He had been thorough, discreet, and efficient. Exactly what I needed now. Reed Investigations, his voice answered, professional and alert despite the early hour. Mr. Reed, this is Eleanor Hartwell. I used your services about 5 years ago for a contractor background check. Mrs. Hartwell, yes, I remember. How can I help you? I need a complete background investigation on someone. Employment history, financial records, credit reports, debt analysis, social media activity, everything you can legally obtain. And I need it deep. I want to know everything this person is hiding. Thomas was quiet for a moment. How deep are we talking? Bottom of the ocean deep, I said. I want to know things she doesn't think anyone knows. I want to see the real person behind the image she presents to the world. I can do that, Thomas said. Who's the subject? Victoria Eleanor Ashford. She's 29 years old, currently living in the city, works as what she calls a luxury brand consultant but is actually a marketing coordinator. She's married to my son. I gave him all the identifying information I had, her birthday, her parents' names, her previous addresses, her employer. How fast do you need this? He asked. 1 week, I said. Can you do it? For the kind of investigation you're describing, 1 week is tight, but yes, I can do it. It's going to be expensive. Money is not a concern, I said, and I heard the slight change in his tone as he processed that statement coming from someone he probably remembered as living very modestly. I'll have a preliminary report in 3 days, and a complete report in 7, he said. Expect my invoice to be around $15,000. That's fine, I said. Send everything to my email address, encrypted. And Thomas, discretion is essential. Always, Mrs. Hartwell. My third call was to my attorney, James Morrison. James had handled Richard's estate and had been my lawyer for over 20 years. He knew about the money, of course, and he had helped me structure everything to maintain my privacy. Eleanor, he answered warmly. This is a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you? James, I need you to prepare for something significant. I'm going to be revealing my financial situation to my family, and I need legal protection in place before I do. I could almost hear him sitting up straighter in his chair. After all these years, you're going public? What happened? I gave him the abbreviated version. The house money demand, the smear campaign, the wine incident. I see, he said when I finished. And what kind of legal protection are you thinking? I want an irrevocable trust set up for Michael. $5 million. But with conditions that he has to meet before he can access it. What kind of conditions? James asked, and I could hear him already taking notes. First condition, he has to divorce Victoria within 90 days, or she has to meet a very specific set of requirements, I said. If he stays married to her, she needs to provide a written apology to me, attend financial counseling for 1 full year, and both of them need to complete couples therapy for 1 year. They both need to demonstrate genuinely changed behavior for 24 months, with quarterly check-ins that I approve. And Michael needs to complete at least 6 months of individual therapy regardless of which path he chooses. James was quiet for a long moment. That's an extensive set of conditions. Are you sure about this approach? Completely sure, I said. I want my son back, James. But I want the son I raised, not the man Victoria has turned him into. These conditions give him a choice and a path forward. But they make it clear that access to family money comes with family values. What else do you need? James asked. I want to establish the Richard Hartwell Foundation with an initial funding of $15 million. Purpose is supporting entrepreneurs from modest backgrounds, exactly the kind of people Richard would have wanted to help. I want a scholarship fund with $5 million for first-generation college students. And I want my will updated. If I die before this revelation happens, I want a video message to Michael explaining everything, with the full truth released to him posthumously. I can have all of this prepared by the end of the week, James said. And Eleanor? I think you're handling this exactly right. Sometimes the people we love need to face hard truths, and sometimes money is the only thing that gets their attention. That's exactly what I'm counting on, I said. The private investigator's preliminary report arrived on Thursday, 3 days after I hired him, and it was even more damning than I had expected. I sat at my computer reading through page after page of documentation, my anger growing with each revelation. Victoria's luxury brand consultant job was exactly what I suspected, an entry-level marketing coordinator position paying $47,000 a year. But that was just the beginning. Thomas had found records of Victoria being fired from her 2 previous jobs. The first termination was due to multiple hostile work environment complaints from 3 different coworkers who said Victoria was condescending, bullying, and created a toxic atmosphere. The second firing was for expense report fraud. Victoria had been submitting personal purchases as business expenses, charging personal shopping trips, spa days, and restaurant meals to her corporate card and claiming they were client entertainment. But the financial information was what truly shocked me. Victoria had credit card debt totaling $127,000 across 7 different cards. She had store credit accounts with an additional $34,000 in debt. Her car, the BMW she drove so proudly, was leased at $890 per month, a payment she could barely afford. Her apartment rent was $2,400 per month, and according to the financial records Thomas had obtained, her parents were paying it. She claimed to live independently, but she was completely dependent on her parents' money. Her bank account had a balance of $340. Her savings account was at 0. She had no investment accounts, no retirement savings, no assets of any kind. The designer wardrobe she wore so proudly was purchased entirely on credit cards she was only making minimum payments on. But what made my blood run cold were the screenshots Thomas had obtained from Victoria's text messages with her friends. Michael is my meal ticket out of this debt hole, one message read. He's boring but he's stable, and I can train him. Then maybe I'll upgrade later. Another message said, his mom is so poor it's actually embarrassing, but whatever, not like I have to see her much. And then there was this one, once we get the house, I'll finally have real status. I can start posting pics and my friends will be so jealous. That's worth dealing with Michael's mediocre personality. Thomas had also found recent activity on Victoria's computer showing she had been browsing websites for wealthy men seeking companionship. She hadn't created an active profile yet, but she had drafted one. Successful marketing executive seeking generous partner who appreciates the finer things in life. The report on Michael's finances was heartbreaking in a different way. My son had $67,000 in credit card debt, almost all of it from Victoria's spending on his cards. He still owed $43,000 on the personal loan he had taken out for Victoria's engagement ring. He had taken out a $25,000 loan from his 401k retirement account to start building a down payment fund for the house. My son was $135,000 in debt. He was working 80-hour weeks, and according to the health information Thomas had obtained through public records, Michael had recently been prescribed medication for anxiety and high blood pressure. He was 36 years old and his health was already suffering from the stress. But what broke my heart was Michael's internet search history that Thomas had somehow accessed. How to afford a down payment on a house. Second jobs, night shifts. Is it wrong to ask your parent for money? How to help elderly parent on fixed income. Affordable gifts for mother on a budget. Michael genuinely believed I was poor. He felt guilty that he couldn't help me more. He was searching for ways to support his mother while drowning in debt created by his wife. That guilt, that desire to help me even when he thought he had nothing, that was the son I had raised. That goodness was still in there, buried under Victoria's manipulation, but still there. The complete report arrived on schedule 7 days after I hired Thomas. It included everything from the preliminary report plus additional documentation, bank statements, credit reports, court records, social media archives, and even surveillance photos. Thomas had been thorough to the point of being excessive, but I appreciated it. This was ammunition, and I intended to use every bit of it. The invoice was $14,800. I paid it immediately from one of my accounts, not even blinking at the expense. It was worth every penny. With the investigation complete and the legal documents in progress, it was time to set the trap. I needed to arrange a revelation that would be public, undeniable, and devastating in its completeness. I called Michael on a Tuesday afternoon. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice wary. "Mom?" "Michael, I need to talk to you," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Both you and Victoria. It's important." "Mom, if this is about what happened at dinner," I wanted to call, but Victoria said. I interrupted him. "It's not about that. This is about something else. Something about your father. Something I should have told you years ago, but I wasn't ready." There was a long pause. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, Victoria asking who was on the phone. "What about Dad?" Michael asked, his voice uncertain. "I can't tell you over the phone," I said. "I need to tell you in person. Both of you need to hear this. It's about his company, about what happened after he sold it. There are things you don't know, Michael. Important things." I let the mystery hang in the air, knowing curiosity would override any reluctance. "This Saturday," I continued. 1 o'clock. The Madison Room at the Grandview Hotel. "That's an expensive restaurant, Mom." "Are you sure? I'll handle the cost," I said firmly. "Just promise me you'll both be there. Please, Michael. This is important. This is about your inheritance, about your father's legacy. Things you deserve to know." I could hear more muffled conversation, Victoria's voice sharp with questions. "Okay," Michael finally said. "We'll be there. 1 o'clock Saturday." "Thank you," I said. "And Michael? Come prepared to hear some things that are going to surprise you." We hung up, and I allowed myself a small smile. The trap was set. But Michael and Victoria weren't the only people I invited to that Saturday lunch. Over the next 2 days, I made a series of very specific phone calls. I called my financial advisor Patricia and asked her to attend with complete documentation of my portfolio. I called my attorney James and asked him to bring all the legal documents we had prepared. I called Thomas Reed and asked him to be present with copies of his investigation report. I called Robert Chan, Richard's best friend and the executor of Richard's estate, who had been there when everything happened 22 years ago. I called my sister Paula, who deserved to know the truth after all these years. I called Michael's godfather, Uncle Raymond, who had always been close to our family. And then I made the most interesting call of all. I called Victoria's parents. I had their number from the wedding invitation list. Victoria's mother Constance answered. "Hello? Mrs. Ashford, this is Eleanor Hartwell, Michael's mother," I said pleasantly. "We met at the engagement party and the wedding." "Oh yes, Eleanor," her voice was polite but cool. "How can I help you?" "I'm having a family gathering this Saturday at 1 o'clock at the Grandview Hotel, and I wanted to extend an invitation to you and your husband. I'll be discussing some important family matters, some financial information that I think you and your daughter would be very interested in hearing." There was a pause. I could tell Constance was intrigued despite herself. "Financial information?" "Yes," I said. "Information about my late husband's estate and some decisions I'm making about inheritance and family trusts. Since Victoria is married to my son, I thought it would be appropriate for her parents to be present for this discussion." Constance's tone shifted noticeably. "We would be happy to attend. Should we bring anything?" "Just yourselves," I said. "Everything else will be provided." After I hung up, I sat back and reviewed my guest list. Michael and Victoria would arrive expecting a small, private conversation about Richard's company. Instead, they would walk into a room full of witnesses, lawyers, financial advisors, family members, and Victoria's own parents. They would be surrounded before they even understood what was happening. It was perfect. I reserved the entire private dining room at the Grandview Hotel for Saturday. The cost was $8,000 for the room rental and meal service, but I didn't care about the expense. This needed to be done right. I arrived an hour early on Saturday, dressed in my typical modest clothing. A faded dress from a discount store, worn cardigan, old purse. The hotel staff treated me with barely concealed disdain when I walked through the elegant lobby. The maitre d' looked at me like I was lost. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting I had wandered in by mistake. "I have a reservation for the private dining room," I said. "Name is Hartwell." He checked his list and his eyebrows rose slightly. "You're Mrs. Hartwell? The party of 12? "That's correct," I said calmly. "Is there a problem?" He looked me up and down, clearly skeptical that this woman in discount store clothes could afford an $8,000 room rental. Before he could say anything, James Morrison walked through the door. James was wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase, every inch the successful attorney. "Eleanor," he called out warmly. "I hope I'm not late." He walked over and kissed me on the cheek. Then he turned to the maitre d'. "Mrs. Hartwell is hosting today. She owns more than this entire hotel is worth, so I suggest you treat her with the respect she deserves." The maitre d's face went white. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. Mrs. Hartwell, please right this way." He led us to the private dining room, suddenly obsequious and apologetic. The room was beautiful. A long mahogany table with 12 chairs, crystal glasses, fresh flowers, elegant place settings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. It was exactly the kind of room that would impress Victoria, which was partly why I had chosen it. Over the next 30 minutes, my other guests arrived. Patricia Chen with a briefcase full of financial documents. Thomas Reed with his investigation reports. Robert Chen, Richard's old friend, who embraced me warmly. Uncle Raymond, looking confused but supportive. My sister Paula, nervous and uncertain about what was happening. And then, at 12:55, Victoria's parents arrived. Constance and Richard Ashford walked in wearing expensive clothes and expressions of polite curiosity. "Eleanor," Constance said, greeting me with air kisses. "What an interesting venue you've chosen. We're very curious about this family discussion you mentioned." All will be explained shortly, I said with a smile. Please, have a seat. Everyone took their places around the table. I positioned myself at the head, with Patricia and James on either side of me. Thomas sat nearby with his reports. The family members were scattered around the table, all watching me with various expressions of confusion and curiosity. And then, at exactly 1 o'clock, Michael and Victoria walked through the door. The looks on their faces when they saw the room full of people was absolutely priceless. Michael's mouth literally fell open. Victoria's eyes went wide, then immediately narrowed with suspicion. Mom? Michael said, his voice uncertain. What is all this? You said this was about Dad, about something you needed to tell me privately. What I need to tell you is too important to say just once, I replied calmly. Everyone here needs to hear this. Please, both of you, sit down. Victoria was looking around the table, her gaze lingering on her parents. Mother? Father? What are you doing here? Your mother-in-law invited us, Constance said, equally confused. She said this was about family financial matters. Victoria's face went through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, suspicion, and then something that looked almost like fear. This is ridiculous, she said loudly. Whatever this is, whatever intervention you think you're staging, we don't have to stay. Sit down, Victoria, I said, and something in my voice made her stop. I wasn't asking. I was telling. And for the first time in our entire relationship, she obeyed me. Michael and Victoria sat down in the 2 empty chairs across from me. The entire table was silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. I looked around at all of them. My son, anxious and confused. His wife, defensive and angry. Her parents, curious and superior. My family, worried and supportive. My team of professionals, ready with their documentation. Everyone was here. Everyone was present. The trap had closed. And now it was time to spring it. I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the mahogany table. The room fell into absolute silence. Every eye was on me. Michael looked terrified. Victoria looked suspicious and angry. Her parents looked mildly annoyed at the drama. My sister Paula looked concerned. Uncle Raymond looked confused but supportive. And my team of professionals, Patricia, James, and Thomas, looked ready for what was about to happen. I took a deep breath and began. For the past 22 years, I have lived a very specific kind of life, I said, my voice calm and clear. I have worn clothes from thrift stores and discount racks. I have driven old cars that barely ran. I have clipped coupons and shopped sales and lived in a modest house with worn furniture. Many of you assumed I was poor. Some of you thought I was barely scraping by on a fixed income, on Social Security, and whatever small amount Richard left me when he died. I paused, looking directly at Victoria. Some of you called me trash. Victoria's face flushed red, but she said nothing. Michael looked down at the table. I continued. I want to be very clear about something right now, in front of all of these witnesses. I am not poor. I have never been poor. Not for a single day in the last 22 years. I nodded to Patricia, who stood up and began placing documents on the table in front of everyone. This is my current portfolio statement from Goldman Sachs, dated as of yesterday's market close. As you can see, I am worth $40,217,000. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. It was the kind of silence that happens when reality shifts so dramatically that the human brain needs a moment to recalibrate. Michael stared at the paper in front of him, his face draining of all color. Victoria grabbed her copy, her hands shaking as she read it. Then she read it again. And again. Her mother Constance was doing the same thing, her mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. My sister Paula actually gasped out loud. Uncle Raymond just stared at me with wide eyes. Patricia continued placing documents on the table. Bank statements from Chase, from Wells Fargo, from Morgan Stanley. Investment portfolios showing stocks, bonds, mutual funds, international holdings. Property deeds for 3 rental properties I owned in different states. Trust documents. Asset summaries. Page after page after page of proof that Eleanor Hartwell, the poor widow in discount store clothes, was actually worth more than everyone at this table combined. My late husband Richard sold his software company in 1998 for $52 million, I continued, my voice steady. After taxes, we had $34 million. Richard died in 2003, and I inherited everything. I have been living on approximately $35,000 a year and investing the rest. The portfolio has grown to its current value through conservative investment strategies managed by Patricia Chenhier, my private wealth advisor for the past 22 years. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, this can't be real. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked on the last word. Because I wanted to raise you right, Michael, I said, looking directly at my son. Without entitlement. Without laziness. Without greed. I wanted you to understand the value of money, the value of hard work, the value of earning what you have. I picked up another document. I gave you $100,000 for college. You thought that was everything. You thought you were making it on your own after that. Michael nodded, still looking stunned. But I paid off your student loans anonymously. $23,000 through a third-party service. I co-signed your car loan and made most of the payments. I covered your first apartment security deposit through your landlord. You were never on your own, Michael. You just thought you were. I was supporting you the entire time, but I wanted you to feel like you had earned your success. Why? Michael whispered. Why would you do that? Because I wanted you to develop character before you had access to money, I said. I wanted you to learn to work hard, to appreciate what you had, to stay humble and grateful. And you did. You became exactly the man I hoped you would be. Hardworking, responsible, kind. I paused. Until you met Victoria. Victoria's head snapped up. Excuse me? You heard me correctly, I said, my voice cooling. Michael was a good man, a grateful son, someone who appreciated what he had. But then he met you, and slowly, gradually, you poisoned him against me. You made him ashamed of his mother. You made him believe I was an embarrassment. You isolated him from me, turned him against the woman who raised him and sacrificed for him and loved him unconditionally. Victoria stood up, her chair scraping loudly. You lied to us. We've been struggling. Michael has been working himself to death trying to save for a house, and you've been sitting on $40 million? I tested you, I said simply. I wanted to know if my son and his wife would love me and respect me when they thought I had nothing. And you failed spectacularly. This is insane, Victoria said, her voice rising. You let us struggle, you let us beg you for help, you watched Michael work 80-hour weeks, all as some kind of sick test? No, I said firmly. I watched you reveal who you really are. I watched you treat me with contempt and cruelty because you thought I was beneath you. I watched you throw wine in my face and call me trash. I watched you mock my clothes, my car, my home. I watched you smear my name to everyone who would listen. And I documented all of it. I nodded to Thomas Reed, who stood up and began distributing folders around the table. This is a comprehensive background investigation into Victoria Eleanor Ashford, I said. Conducted by Thomas Reed, a licensed private investigator. The contents are quite revealing. Victoria lunged for the folders, trying to grab them, but Thomas smoothly moved them out of her reach and continued his distribution. Michael opened his folder and began to read. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, hurt, and finally, anger. According to the investigation, I said, reading from my own copy, Victoria is currently $127,000 in credit card debt across 7 different cards. She has an additional $34,000 in store credit debt. She leases her BMW for $890 per month, a payment she can barely afford. Her apartment rent of $2,400 per month is paid by her parents. Her bank account currently has a balance of $340. She has zero savings, zero investments, zero retirement accounts, and zero assets of any kind. Victoria's face had gone from red to white. Her mother Constance was reading the report with growing horror on her face. But the financial irresponsibility is just the beginning, I continued. Victoria was fired from her previous 2 jobs. The first for creating a hostile work environment, with 3 separate complaints from coworkers. The second for expense report fraud, submitting personal purchases as business expenses. Victoria's father Richard Ashford looked up from the report, his face dark with anger. Victoria, is this true? It's an invasion of privacy. Victoria shouted. She had me investigated like some kind of criminal. You made yourself a subject of interest when you threw wine in my face in my own home, I said coldly. And I wanted to know exactly who my son had married. I picked up another page from the report. But the most interesting findings are the text messages. I began to read out loud. Michael is my meal ticket out of this debt hole. He's boring but he's stable. I can train him. Then maybe I'll upgrade later. Michael's hands were shaking as he read his own copy. I continued reading. His mom is so poor it's actually embarrassing, but whatever, not like I have to see her much. And then the final one, once we get the house, I'll finally have real status. That's worth dealing with Michael's mediocre personality. Michael stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward with a crash. You called me a meal ticket? His voice was shaking with emotion. You said you'd upgrade? You called my personality mediocre? Victoria's face crumpled. Baby, those were just jokes. You're taking them out of context. I didn't mean, there's more, I interrupted. The investigation also found that Victoria has been browsing websites for wealthy men seeking companionship. She drafted a profile describing herself as a successful marketing executive seeking a generous partner. She hasn't activated it yet, but the intention is clear. Constance Ashford stood up, her face pale with shock and embarrassment. Victoria, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been planning to leave Michael after he helped you get what you wanted. I wasn't going to, Victoria started, but her mother cut her off. Don't lie to me. I've read the messages. They're right here in black and white. Victoria's father was reading through the financial documents, his face getting darker by the second. You're $160,000 in debt? We've been paying your rent for 2 years thinking you just needed help getting established. You told us you were saving money, building toward buying your own place. I was going to pay you back, Victoria said, her voice small now, defensive. Once Michael and I got the house, once his mother helped us like she should have. His mother owed you nothing. I said, my voice sharp as a whip. His mother was testing you, and you failed every single test. You treated me like garbage because you thought I was poor. You threw wine in my face. You called me trash. You made my son ashamed of the woman who gave him everything. I looked at Victoria with no anger now, just cold assessment. You are a materialistic fraud, Victoria. You're buried in debt while pretending to be successful. You married my son thinking you could control him, use him to solve your financial problems, and then discard him when someone better came along. But you made one critical error in your calculations. Victoria was crying now, mascara running down her face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and frustration at being exposed. What error, she spat. You married into the wrong family, I said simply. You should have married me. Because I actually have money. Michael's accountant's salary, which you found so boring and mediocre, that was never going to solve your problems. But $40 million? That could have paid off your debts 1,000 times over. If only you had been kind to his mother. If only you had shown respect. If only you had proven yourself worthy. But you didn't. You showed me exactly who you are. And I believe you. Michael was still standing, still staring at the text messages in his folder. His voice when he spoke was hollow, empty of emotion. You never loved me. You just saw a stable income and someone you could manipulate. That's not true, Victoria said, reaching for him, but Michael stepped back. Don't touch me, he said quietly. Everything you said to me, everything you told me about my mother, about how she was selfish and didn't care about me, all of it was lies. You were the selfish one. You were the one who didn't care about anyone but yourself. James Morrison stood up then, holding a different set of documents. Michael, your mother has made provisions for you, he said, his voice professional and calm. Despite everything that has happened, despite the poor choices you've made, she still loves you and wants to help you. She has established an irrevocable trust in your name worth $5 million. Michael's head snapped toward James. $5 million? His voice was barely a whisper. However, James continued, there are conditions for accessing this trust. You have two options. Option 1, divorce Victoria within 90 days. If you choose this path, the trust becomes accessible to you after you complete 6 months of individual therapy and demonstrate financial responsibility for 1 year. Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal. You can't do this. You can't bribe him to leave me. James ignored her and continued. Option 2, if you remain married to Victoria, she must provide a written apology to Eleanor, attend financial counseling for 1 full year, and both of you must complete couples therapy for 1 year. You must both demonstrate genuinely changed behavior for 24 months, with quarterly evaluations that Eleanor must approve. Michael must still complete 6 months of individual therapy regardless of which option he chooses. James placed the trust documents on the table. You have 30 days to decide which path you'll take, Michael. But the choice is entirely yours. The room had fallen into stunned silence again. Everyone was processing what had just been revealed. Michael stood frozen, looking between the trust documents, the investigation report, and his wife. Victoria was crying harder now, and her mascara and makeup running down her face in black streaks. Michael, you can't seriously be considering this, she said, her voice desperate. She's trying to control you with money. This is manipulation. No, Michael said slowly, his voice gaining strength. This is consequences. This is what happens when you treat people like garbage and assume they'll never have the power to respond. He looked at his mother, and tears were streaming down his face now too. Mom, I let her throw wine at you. I stood there and watched her call you trash, and I did nothing. I let her poison me against you. I believed her lies instead of trusting the woman who raised me. Yes, I said simply. You did. I don't know how you can ever forgive me, Michael said, his voice breaking. I don't know if you should forgive me. The trust gives you a path forward, I said. But Michael, I want you to understand something. I'm not giving you this money to manipulate you. I'm giving it to you because you're my son and I love you. But I'm attaching conditions because I want you to do the work to become the man you were before Victoria got her hooks into you. I want you to get therapy and understand how you were manipulated. I want you to learn financial responsibility so you never end up in this kind of debt again. I want you to rebuild yourself into someone who can look at me without shame. Victoria was on her feet now, pointing at me with a shaking finger. You're a monster. You watched us struggle for years, all for some sick psychological experiment. You let Michael work himself into the ground. You let him take on debt, compromise his health, all so you could prove some point about character. I let you reveal your character, I corrected. And you showed me everything I needed to see. You're cruel when you think someone can't fight back. You're materialistic and shallow. You judge people by their bank accounts and their clothes. You're buried in debt while playing dress up as a successful person. You married my son intending to use him and then discard him. Every single thing about you is false. Victoria's parents had been sitting quietly through most of this exchange, but now Constance stood up. I think we've heard enough, she said, her voice cold and clipped. Victoria, we're leaving. You're coming with us. Mother, Victoria started, but Constance cut her off. Now. We will be having a very serious conversation about your debts, your lies, and your future. But we will not be having it here. She looked at me, and something in her expression was almost apologetic. Mrs. Hartwell, I owe you an apology. We didn't know. We didn't know what Victoria was doing, how she was treating you. If we had known, you would have stopped paying her rent? I asked, my voice neutral. Constance flinched. Yes. Probably. We thought we were helping her become independent. Instead, we were enabling her to live beyond her means. Victoria's father Richard stood as well. The financial support ends today, he said firmly. Victoria, you're 30 years old. You have massive debt, no savings, and apparently no sense of responsibility. Your mother and I will no longer be subsidizing your lifestyle. You'll need to figure out how to pay your own rent starting next month. You can't be serious. Victoria shrieked. You're going to abandon me? Your own daughter? We're not abandoning you, Constance said coldly. We're doing what we should have done years ago. We're letting you experience the consequences of your own choices. The Ashfords walked toward the door. Victoria stood there for a moment, looking wildly around the room as if searching for someone who would defend her, support her, take her side. But there was no one. Even Michael was looking at her like she was a stranger. This isn't over, Victoria said, her voice venomous as she pointed at me. I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer. That money should be Michael's, and as his wife, I have rights to it. James Morrison spoke up calmly. Actually, you don't. The trust is structured specifically to protect the assets from any spousal claims. You have no legal right to those funds under any circumstances. But please, do consult an attorney. I'd be happy to explain the legal protections we've put in place. Victoria let out a sound of pure frustration and rage, then stormed out of the room. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway, and then there was the distant sound of a door slamming. The room was quiet again. Michael was still standing, still holding the investigation report, still looking like his world had just exploded. My sister Paula got up and came over to me, putting her hand on my arm. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. All these years, I thought, I judged you for not helping Michael. I'm so sorry. You didn't know, I said gently. That was the point. Nobody knew. Uncle Raymond was shaking his head in amazement. 22 years you kept this secret. 22 years of living like you had nothing. Why, Eleanor? Why put yourself through that? Because I needed to know who loved me for me, I said. And I needed Michael to learn values before he learned wealth. I needed him to understand hard work, to appreciate what he had, to develop character. And for a long time, my plan worked. He became exactly the man I hoped he would be. I looked at my son, who was still processing everything. But then Victoria came along, and I got to see what would happen when someone tested his character. Would he stand up for his mother? Would he see through her manipulation? Would he defend what was right? I paused. And he failed those tests. He chose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. He chose his wife's approval over his mother's dignity. He let someone throw wine in my face and call me trash. Those failures needed to happen, Michael. Because now you understand what you're capable of becoming when you stop thinking for yourself. Michael finally spoke, his voice raw and exhausted. What do I do now, Mom? How do I fix this? You start by making a choice, I said. You can divorce Victoria and start rebuilding your life. Or you can stay married to her and see if she's capable of the kind of fundamental change the trust conditions require. But Michael, I'll tell you right now, I don't think she's capable of that change. I think she's shown you exactly who she is, and you need to believe her. I believe her, Michael said quietly. God help me, I believe every word of what's in this report. The meal ticket comment, the plan to upgrade, calling me boring. That's really how she sees me. How she's always seen me. Then you know what you need to do, I said. Michael nodded slowly. I need to file for divorce. And then you need to get therapy, I said firmly. You need to understand how you got here, how you let someone manipulate you so completely that you turned your back on your own mother. You need to understand why you chose Victoria's lies over everything you knew to be true about me. You need to rebuild yourself, Michael. The money will wait. The trust will be there when you've done the work. But the work comes first. I understand, Michael said. He looked around the room at all the witnesses to his humiliation, at the documents spread across the table, at the evidence of his wife's betrayal and his own complicity. I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it. For every moment I let her disrespect you. For choosing her over you. For believing I was too good for my own mother. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said. And I forgive you, Michael. But you have to forgive yourself. And you have to do better. Not for the money. Not for the trust. But because you deserve to be the man I raised you to be. Patricia Chan began gathering up the financial documents. James Morrison collected the trust papers. Thomas Reed packed up his investigation reports. My family members started to stand, preparing to leave, giving Michael and me space for what came next. As everyone filed out, offering words of support and amazement, Michael and I were left alone in the beautiful dining room overlooking the city. We stood there in silence for a long moment. I don't expect us to go back to how things were, I finally said. Too much has happened. Too much has been broken. But Michael, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. Even when you hurt me, even when you disappointed me, I was your mother and I loved you. I just needed you to find your way back to yourself. I will, Michael promised. I'll do the therapy. I'll file for divorce. I'll pay off the debts with my own money, my own work. I'll earn the right to that trust, Mom. Not because of the money, but because I need to prove to myself that I can be better than I've been. That's all I ever wanted, I said. We stood there together, mother and son, in a room that had just witnessed the destruction of lies and the revelation of truth. Outside the windows, the city stretched out below us, full of people living their lives, keeping their secrets, making their choices. I had kept my secret for 22 years. I had lived as someone I wasn't to discover who everyone else truly was. And finally, the test was over. The truth was out. And whatever came next, we would face it with honesty instead of deception. It wouldn't be easy. Michael had hard work ahead of him. I had to learn to trust him again. But we had something now that we hadn't had in years. We had the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild on.